Didn't. Welcome to Monkey Time. We're a live call-in cable access show, and you can find clips on YouTube as well. Thank you for that, Carol, by the way. Oh, wait, I should take off my hat because it's hot under these lights. We have a guest with us tonight on the phones, and it's a really interesting topic. We're seeing the legislature doing all kinds of things that are basically being crammed down our throats. And one of the things that we're definitely going to see from this legislature in North Carolina is an increase in charter schools. And there are some serious questions that get raised when you actually look at how certain charter schools work. And so we have a reporter with us on the phone. Sarah, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Thanks. Thank you. Thanks for joining us. I really appreciate it. This is Sarah Oversight. Did I say that right?
Yes, you did.
Is that Polish? What?
It is Finnish, actually.
Finnish. Oh, we have a Finnish reporter on the phone.
Finnish American, I'd say.
Finnish American, right. So Sarah is an investigative reporter with the NC Justice Center. And you can go to the NC Justice Center's website at ncjustice.org. They have a blog called Policy Watch, North Carolina Policy Watch, and that's ncpolicywatch.com. Is that right? Okay.
That is it.
All right. And Sarah, you recently, through some Freedom of Information requests, recently posted an investigation at ncpolicywatch.com. And if folks go to my Twitter page, I link directly to the investigation about a charter school in Winston-Salem.
Yes, and it was, and so I have been looking at charter schools for the last year or so, given their how they're growing so quickly in the state. And in this particular charter school that I took a closer look at is called Quality Education Academy. It's based in Winston-Salem. And what I found is that it's a relatively small charter school, but it has, in the last few years, developed this basketball program, this high school boys basketball program that's been basically playing at these elite national levels. And what I found is that the way that they're doing it is by taking in students from around the country and around the world and doing so and educating them and bringing them and paying for them to be on this very high level basketball team at the school that is basically funded by North Carolina taxpayers.
And these are students, they're bringing in students from Serbia, Nigeria, the Bahamas, and across the country, which public high schools can't do.
Right. Most of kind of what we call the traditional public schools, what we generally think of when we think of high schools, public schools, there are a lot of rules about who can enroll in a school and how they can come and play in athletic teams. And in most schools, you have to be a resident of that school district. So if you're going to if you're in Wake County, if you live in Raleigh, if you live, you're either going to live in the Broughton district or Enloe or whatever school it may be, and that's where you're going to attend. Charter schools have a lot more flexibility. They're allowed to pull from all over state, but one of the requirements is that you and your parents or your guardians are actually residents of North Carolina. What appeared to have happened in this case is that this charter school basically didn't pay attention to that, and what they were doing is this basketball coach who was fairly prominent in AAU circles.
What is AAU?
AAU is, and I learned a lot about this over the course of my investigation. It's amateur basketball, but it feeds a lot into basically college basketball, and it's highly competitive. In some circles, there's feelings that there's a lot of people who are out there profiting and taking advantage of young athletes.
These are athletes who are in private schools mostly, or not in school at all, or?
Well, the AAU leagues are generally, it's almost like a summer league, and so these sometimes these kids are in private and sometimes they're in public, but what happened in the case of this charter school is that it was actually pulling kids from all over the country and the world to play at this public charter school. And what we've generally seen with these really high-performing, high-level basketball programs, those are usually happening at private schools. I mean, those are the basketball factory is kind of the word that's tossed around, that we see these schools that are, just have these really stacked teams where these kids are going on to play at some of the top college programs. or the NBA. And it's highly unusual to see a public school get into this game. There's usually a lot of money involved. There's you've got shoe companies that are sponsors, and
really, of these private high schools.
Right, in these private high schools, it tends to be there's people that have been involved in it, not just to help young kids. It's, there's money to be made, and I did not find evidence of sponsorships and people making money at this public charter school. Part of what I found is that it was really hard to get a hold of their finances and to really get a clear count of what was happening. But it certainly was suspect that we have this public school that is basically funding this basketball program that's playing all over the country and pulling in kids from all over the world to play.
Now, this raises interesting questions. We're talking with Sarah Ovaska from the NC Justice Center, and who blogs regularly and does investigative reporting at ncpolicywatch.com. And this raises interesting questions about the idea of charter schools, which, I mean, come on, the basic idea behind charter schools is let's use some of this tax dollar money to, fund alternative, different solutions. And there have been successful charter schools, right? You would not deny that. I'm thinking Raleigh Charter right downtown here.
Yep, that Raleigh Charter is a very, very successful one. There's other schools around the state that have done really well.
So you're not opposed to the idea of charter schools as a whole?
No, certainly, and I don't think most people are. I think most of the concerns that we've seen with charter schools is that because they're not beholden to the same rules as traditional schools, there are situations where people are coming in and taking advantage, either financially or otherwise, and we've also seen a lot of racial segregation at different charter schools. That's not really kind of what I found in this situation, but...
well, Quality Education Academy is a mostly black school, isn't it?
It is. It's mostly black, and I should say it wasn't. A lot of the concerns are that some charter schools are turning into white flight schools, and this is, Quality Education was predominantly African American, and what a lot of studies have found in the state, and there's a great Duke researcher by the name of Helen Ladd, that's looked at this, is that the charter schools in the state tend to either be one racial minority or the other, and are really painting a much different picture than what we have in most public schools in the state.
Wait, either white or black, you mean, or
right.
Okay.
Majority white schools or majority black schools in kind of different environments, and that there's these trends of basically resegregation of schools that we're seeing in charter schools. And
the accusation from opponents of charter schools is that one of the reasons charter schools do so well is they tend to cream off the richest parents with the home lives that support the students more, and the students who come from wealthier backgrounds, and that's why the charter schools like Raleigh Charter, et cetera, succeed. I'm just saying that's one of the accusations. I don't know if that's true for Raleigh Charter.
That's certainly one of the criticisms out there, and one of the concerns that a lot of educational groups have, and a lot of groups that kind of speak up for children that may not have parents that are, the loudest advocates or even have the ability to go to charter schools. One other aspect about charter schools is that they're not required to provide transportation or a federal lunch program. So if you're a low-income kid, then your parent has to make the choice, are we going to be able to drive, my son or daughter to school every day, plus bring them a lunch, and whatnot, whereas if they go to their public school, if a family
my kid will get fed.
Very low income, they would be able to get free and reduced lunches, which in the state, and this is a separate matter, something separately I found out, the numbers are astonishing for the number of kids that are eligible for the free and lunch, and a lot of times for kids that would simply not eat if it were not for the free and reduced lunch programs at the schools.
And so the lack of that requirement for the charter schools, even though they're getting public money, means that for a lot of families, you're saying that's a huge factor in whether they can send their kids to charter schools.
It can be, yes, it is. And there are some charter schools schools, like Quality Education, does participate in the federal school lunch program, though there's been some issues with the way they've operated it.
Okay, well,
So there are some charter schools that are doing it.
Okay, well, that's good to know. Quality Education, QEA, we'll call it, over in Winston-Salem, this basketball factory. And the New York Daily News did an article about them, too, a few years back, where they were kind of concerned that there was this new powerhouse in Winston-Salem, basketball powerhouse in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and they were curious how this was happening, right?
They did. They did it about a year ago, and it was pretty interesting that a large metro paper in New York was taking interest in this charter school, in this basketball program, because it, essentially was a small program that popped up out of nowhere and was making a lot of waves nationally in basketball.
And when you say making a lot of waves, you mean winning a lot of games against teams like teams up in New York.
Right, a lot of teams, a lot of kind of the really kind of those that follow basketball closely, which, we're in North Carolina, a lot of people do. So there's a lot of these very well-known basketball schools out there in the country, and Quality Education was up there playing against them and kind of holding their own. And there are questions. The NCAA has essentially not cleared the school for players to play. That means that every single student, they need to take a really close look at their transcripts to make sure if they're eligible to play. And that's pretty unusual, and it's unusual that the agency hasn't cleared them at this point.
We're talking with Sarah Ovasco, who's an investigative reporter with North Carolina Policy Watch. If you go to my Twitter page, I link directly to a couple of articles that she's written about this charter school in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, called Quality Education Academy. And they've been around for a long time. They were one of the state's first charter schools, you say in your article. But in 2008, they suddenly started recruiting players from Nigeria, Serbia, and all across the country, which local public schools can't do, North Carolina public schools can't do, to create this basketball program that's become nationally known. Now, can we talk about how this Freedom of Information request that you made that got you this letter from 3 Serbian students, 3 high school students at the school? Can tell us about that, those 3 Serbian students who wrote to the Department of Public Instruction?
Well, I had gone to the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, which is which is the state education agency here in North Carolina, and said, I want a copy of the file that you have on Quality Education Academy. I want to see the reports. I want to see the documentation, all that. And thanks to our public records law, which is a great resource for people, and anybody can make public records requests, I was able to get this pretty big stack of papers, of documents of the school. And in this, I found that there had been these 3 Serbian students that really, in a rather panicked and frightened way, had emailed June Atkinson, who is the elected state superintendent, the top education official in our state, emailed her and said, we need help. We're in Winston-Salem. We're stuck here. The basketball coach is telling us we need to each pay him $4,000. They're demoting us a grade. We need your help.
And they were told that they were coming on a scholarship.
Right.
And then they got here.
They had said, when we were in Serbia, we told we were coming to scholarship, and now we're having to pay all this money.
To the coach.
And by the coach. We had paid the coach all this money.
$4,000 each.
$4,000 each.
I've read your article, Sarah. It's amazing.
I appreciate it.
Go ahead.
You read it better than my own family did.
Well, so these 3 Serbian students arrive in North Carolina being told they're going to be on a scholarship at this basketball factory school that's come out of nowhere and become nationally known. And then they're told that they're going to be demoted from seniors to juniors, and they have to pay the coach $4,000 each. That's what the letter said, right?
That's what the letter said, and those are some pretty startling accusations, I think, and some pretty startling things for the state to hear about a school that's supposed to be out there to be educating kids. Their goal is to be educating kids in the Winston-Salem area. So essentially what I found is the state then launched an investigation, a probe of its own out of their Office of Charter Schools, and they had a consultant that really took a tough look at the school, asked to see all of the paperwork for all of the basketball players, found out there were even more than the Serbians that were living out of country. And on top of that, state taxpayers, you and I, were basically funding each of these kids specifically, that we were, for each international kid, the state was sending over $8,000 to $10,000 for their education.
Was that legal? Is that legal?
Well, I think it's, I would say, and I'm not an attorney, I'm not a prosecutor, I'm not any of those things, but I certainly, the intent of the law is that we have these schools set up for North Carolina children. And we're here in the North Carolina school system. And so I think at best it probably wasn't following the law as it was intended. And the state education agency, DPI, is the one with the authority to enforce it. And one of the major findings I found in my investigation, and what I really think is probably the most important thing for people to take away, is that the state really had the ability and they had the knowledge that things were not being operated as they should be at the school. They had school leaders that were essentially misleading them. They had school teachers. At one point, there was a state worker who went to check up on some things at the school, and this state employee, this DPI worker, said that she was afraid for her safety, which is something you don't think of
really?
Expecting. Yeah, and it's something that
a DPI worker investigating a North Carolina charter school.
Right, and this was the state DPI worker who has the full authority to go into a charter school and say, hey, I want to look at your records and whatnot, check up, make sure you're doing things right. And this employee felt that, she said she feared for her safety. And what I found in my investigation is that despite all of that, the state took some steps and said, we really want you to explain yourself. And they said this to the Board of Quality Education Academy. And Quality Education responded, and they defended themselves and said, no, we can do this. And they gave some justifications that they felt justified them. But after that point, the state just dropped it. And from what I can tell, it's because they forgot about it. They forgot they had this pending investigation, and they did nothing about it. And they did nothing.
So they're overworked, or they're overworked or something, or what? Why did DPI just drop this when you've got this letter from 3 foreign students saying, hey, and I love the language, we have big problem, we need a help as soon as possible, right?
Right.
That was their letter. We need a help as soon as possible.
Right. It certainly is. It was in this broken English that that you'd expect a recent learner of English to maybe be able to write in. And one other really great detail about the story is that the school provided a response that was supposedly from the students, and it was spelled out in perfect English. Oh, we're so glad you explained to us how the school works, and we're completely happy with our education here. But anyway, I digress. There's one aspect. My feelings about why DPI and what I found was that at that time, this consultant that I had mentioned earlier, this DPI consultant had retired. So she had retired. At that time, the Office of Charter Schools was severely understaffed. They had only 3 employees to oversee the 100 existing charter schools around the state. And that was about that time, it was exactly that time that the state legislature decided to lift the cap on charter schools. Before 2010, 2011, there was a cap on charter schools in the state. We can only have 100 statewide. And the legislature, the Republican legislature in 2010, 2011 lifted that and basically led to a huge increase and a huge increase in the workload for these charter schools.
And there hasn't been a huge increase in staff? There hasn't been a huge increase in staff at DPI, is what you're saying? Or?
No, there hasn't. At that point, when they dropped this investigation, there were 3 employees. They've now got 6 people, but that's 6 people to keep track of, 109 charter schools. We've got 25 more charter schools opening this upcoming fall, and we've got 150 groups that have applied and said they want to open charter schools.
So there's no way the state can oversee these charter schools. Let me phrase that as a question. Is that enough people? I guess I'm asking for your opinion, but I mean, how do other states do this? Is that?
And what we see
excuse me,
is that there's a lot more emphasis on accountability, and there's a lot more emphasis on making sure that the charter schools and the charter school offices have the resources to make sure everyone is behaving properly, or is able to kind of be able to offer the best education there is.
And you're saying that that's better in other states than it is in North Carolina?
It is. In other states, the state education agencies have been able to really make sure that the schools are operating in ways that are protecting taxpayer dollars and are protecting the children that are attending those schools. Because I think sometimes we think about schools, though, it's just, for these charter schools, let's open up, let's see how it goes. But if you think about it, there's a lot of kids that are enrolling for those years in that school. And for a kid, 1 year in school is huge. If you're in third grade, I mean, you're only in third grade once. And so in other states, these agencies have really been able to, and because of resources and whatnot, they've been able to do a better job of making sure that only the best charter schools are operating, and that they're operating to help kids of all incomes, all races.
We're talking with Sarah Ovaska of the NC Justice Center's North Carolina Policy Watch. She's been doing some really neat investigative reporting about a number of things, Sarah. And I highly recommend in these end times in our state, in the beloved Old North State, that you keep an eye on the blog at ncpolicywatch.com, pulse.ncpolicywatch.com, is that right?
Yep, that's
Is that the blog?
ncpolicywatch.com, and got my articles up there, and some of my colleagues as well.
The sketchiness in Quality Education Academy that I got, that's my opinion, my personal opinion. The sketchiness that I got comes from things like the coach has a felony conviction for robbery, common law robbery in the past, spent a year in prison. That letter from the Serbian students. Then it turns out that when you started asking questions about where these students were living, the CEO of QEA said he didn't know.
He did, and he was very misleading in an interview.
How so? How so?
He was. So one question is, where are these kids living? They're coming from overseas, and so where are they staying? And so during the interview I had with Simon Johnson, who's the CEO of the school, I asked him that. And he responded at first, oh, I don't know. They must live somewhere in the city. I don't keep track of that, just like I wouldn't keep track of any of my other students. And I said, well, these are kids coming from overseas. There must be some concern. You must want to make sure they're in a safe environment.
That right there, just the fact that he would say that, even though we later find out it's not true, is just an astonishing thing to come from the head of a school. Oh, I don't know where they live. I'm bringing kids from Nigeria, the Bahamas, Serbia. I don't know. They must live somewhere in the city. That's just astonishing. But okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Right.
So what? Now it's even more astonishing.
Too. And so I pressed him on it and asked him. I had found some documents at the local register of the deeds that had indicated that the basketball coach had essentially been added to the mortgage of this principal, of the CEO of the school, which struck me as unusual. I asked him.
Isn't that good, monkeys? That's called investigative reporting. You looked at the deeds? You looked at the deeds? What? Of the land owned by the school?
Right.
That's brilliant investigative reporting. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And so, and basically at that point, the Simon Johnson told me, well, I own a house. I own this house that me and the basketball coach were involved in. And so I said, well, did any of the players live there, or do they live there? And he responded, they might have lived there. I mean, didn't say they did or didn't. It was this very.
He's probably charging them rent. He's probably charging them rent too. I'll bet you.
I did ask him. He says he considers it a donation, and that he doesn't know whether there are any adults or responsible adults that stay there. He said that he lets the players live there as some type of donation.
Okay.
It was. I never got very clear answers, and I think that's important to state. There was never any clear accountability.
These are huge warning signs, Sarah, and the state just dropped the investigation.
It is, and I think there's questions about why the state did that, and are they going to pick it back up? And if they're doing this with this school here, what are they doing with these 100 other schools, as well as the 100 more that are coming on? And are there guarantees for parents who want to send these kids to these schools that they're safe places and that they're really operating in the best interest of students?
Sarah's investigation, we've only got 3 minutes left, Sarah. You've been fabulous, by the way. Sarah's investigation is available online at pulse.ncpolicywatch.com. It's also, if you go to my Twitter page, Carol, can you put up my Twitter page? You don't have to follow me, but you can see I reposted it from earlier in the week, so it's right up at the top. Links to the article about the letter from the 3 Serbian students frantically asking for help, and Sarah's investigation as well, which includes lots of other links. You also, so just generally, what would be the larger takeaway about oversight of charter schools in North Carolina from this one story that you're the only person investigating this right now in North Carolina? As
far as I know, I mean, I think there's some real questions we have in the state about what we want our education system to look like, and whether we want to make sure that these charter schools that are operating out there, if they're operating in a way that most people feel is serve students as well as taxpayers. And one way of doing that is really making sure that there's accountability, and that's something that charter school leaders nationally say that they want. They say, you know, charter schools are only going to succeed if only good charter schools are out there, and, you know, get the profiteers out, you know, get those that can't really educate kids as they should be. And so I think there's a big question in the state, you know, how do we want these schools to operate? And that's one that our leaders and our state education department has to figure out.
Sarah Ovaska from the NC Justice Center's Policy Watch blog, ncpolicywatch.com, excuse me. You also did a post recently about virtual charter schools, which has a whole new level of lack of oversight, Carol. Oh, we have 3 people, now 6 people to cover 107 existing charter schools, 26 more coming on this year, and another 150, right? And now we're going to add virtual charter schools into the mix. We have 1 minute, Sarah. What do you have to say about that, your new post about virtual charter schools?
This is tough. Well, we've got virtual charter schools are basically schools where kids are sitting at home on their home computers taking classes. There's a lot of companies out there that are making money off of this. They're publicly traded. They've got, you know, they literally have Wall Street is running these companies, and they want to do business in North Carolina as well as nationally.